Oh, I knew this was going to come. Soon as I played Cult of the Lamb, I thought, first, hey, it's furry violence. This is absolutely my shit. And hey, you're sort of running a commune, I think. I wonder what kind of society it will depict. And then I thought, oh god, somebody's going to compare this shit to communism, aren't they? And then I, as a furry communist, am going to have to spend my time picking up the pieces. Well, I tell you what, it finally happened, and it's even more of a garbage take than I thought it would be. As a matter of fact, it's such a garbage take that I'm not going to animate over top of this. That's 40 hours of labor that I just don't want to commit for a low-tier response video like this. Wait, hang on. Did I just say response video? Am I making a response video? Didn't I say I would never do a response video? No, that didn't happen. I never said that. I don't think I ever said that. You can't prove I said that. You have no case. Alright, enough silliness. Let's get this over with.
Welcome to Deep Thoughts While Gaming. I'm Chris Chappell. Or you could take the opposite angle, portraying yourself as a superhuman figure with all the answers.
No socialist leader that springs readily to mind has ever taken this tact. Lenin is known to have admitted many mistakes in his letters, especially in and around the Civil War. He expressed particular regret over the violent overreach of the Cheka in response to quotas for the arrest of traitors and dissidents. Mao Zedong coined the modern Maoist idea of self-criticism and engaged in it himself on numerous occasions. Fidel Castro, as recently as 2010, took full personal responsibility for mistakes made in the persecution of homosexuals in Cuba during the 60s. My personal favorite anecdote, though, is Stalin's response to the German invasion of the Soviet Union, in which he stated vehemently that, if the USSR was not able to stand against Hitler, then it was his own fault, to the point that he was prepared to die in Moscow should it fall. Stalin also, incidentally, on 3 separate occasions, moved to step down from his position as leader of the Communist Party and thus the USSR, and 3 times was voted down. Stalin was also heavily against his own cult of personality and voted against the renaming of what was then called Tsaritsyn to Stalingrad, which, too, passed despite him. The only leadership within the socialist world that I can think of that is portrayed as infallible is the Kim family, who has led the Workers' Party of Korea since the creation of the DPRK. Juche is a very different ideology, though, and the DPRK hasn't officially called itself communist since the 80s. If you do want to see what state-run personality cult looks like, check out Ninada, the DPRK's official English language news site. I might do a video going through it sometime because it's interesting. Unlike this video, which we're now going to continue to watch.
From there, the one who waits tries to show you that obeying his instructions is in your own best interest.
Entirely different topic now, it seems, but having played the game, that's a bit of a stretch. He saves you from death and quite explicitly says that you're now just belong to him. He doesn't promise you glory or salvation or even a meal on your table. He basically just gives you a whole bunch of power and sends you out into the world with the knowledge that as long as you're using the power that he gave you, you'll be in service to him. If anything, this is the exact opposite of what socialist leaders have always done. They don't tell you, follow me and become strong. They say, the strength is in the peasants and the working class. Even if we want to go back and look at the most quote-unquote cultish version of socialism, Juche, whether you're looking at propaganda or reading Kim Il-sung's works, the most they say is that the leader and the party are synonymous with the working people of Korea. This is the exact opposite of, say, fascism, which emphasizes allegiance to the nation's leader, Heil Hitler and all that, and the similarly top-down hierarchy depicted in Cult of the Lamb.
In order to maximize your power and influence. That means getting your paws dirty, literally, as you deal with everything from farming to gathering resources to dealing with waste management.
Title drop. Say it with me now. Communism is when leader cleans my poops. Yay!
At least until you have believers who are devout enough to do all that for you.
So communism is also when people do things for themselves and each other? Based? Question mark? Anyway, this comparison is just flat out dishonest because it isn't to do with devotion. Your followers don't start taking care of themselves and one another when their devotion levels grow. They do it when, drum roll please, you build the infrastructure for them so that they are able to do so. infrastructure, like has been prioritized in socialist experiments. Like, unless your followers are in outright rebellion against you, your followers will use farms, mines, temples, bathrooms, and so forth, as long as they're there, devotion notwithstanding.
In the past, tradition was often the key factor. The monarchies of medieval times, for example, claimed to reflect the essential order of the cosmos. However, in the modern era, that form of legitimacy is much harder to assert.
Hey, hello. Trump supporters would like a word. Also, Max Weber was an idealist who thought that religion was at the heart of social development and saw the loss of that as a bad thing.
As early as the 1910s, Weber worried that this type of charismatic authority would become ever more important as tradition and rationality were pushed aside. That proved to be pretty prophetic for a German scholar that died shortly after World War I. In many places, a new breed of authoritarian leaders built up personality cults between the 1920s and 1930s.
Oh, right. That didn't happen at all until the 1920s and 30s. Did you hear? Napoleon III was just a figment of our imagination, so Weber was totally a prophet and not theorizing based on historical precedents. Don't question it. It would be more accurate to say that the cult of personality, the rise of the leader that rules by charisma, is a natural, and some might even say intentional, effect of democracy. When you allow people to elect their leaders as opposed to their leaders being chosen by religious figures or heredity, the charismatic ones are going to rise to the top. The fact that Chris here is complaining about this, in contrast to rule by bureaucracy and rule by divine right, is kind of concerning.
The best remembered today are, of course, Hitler in Germany, Mussolini in Italy, and Stalin in the Soviet Union.
Stalin was actually super not very charismatic. Russian was his second language, and he was really insecure about his accent. And he was not at all a good orator. He's actually very much an example of rule by state bureaucracy. He played his cards right, and diplomatically, politically, and violently removed opposition to himself within the Communist Party, which was fracturing significantly after Lenin's unexpected death. And Chris here must know this too, because when he was looking around for videos to compare Stalin to Mussolini, the best he could come up with was Stalin writing at his desk, because, he didn't give big bombastic speeches. He was not a charismatic dude.
After World War II, the far-right fascist version of authoritarianism was mostly cast aside.
Hey, check it out. Trump supporters would like a word too, electric boogaloo.
But the Soviet version, with a communist party dominated by an all-powerful central leader, began to spread.
With a "this is fine" caption, because you can tell a country is a dictatorship when it has a military. Ignore the fact that the USA has by far the largest military in the world.
This was the pattern for a host of communist regimes, like East Germany, Cuba, Yugoslavia, Romania, North Korea, and China, among others.
Very interesting that he lists off only socialist nations and not Libya, Saudi Arabia, Ecuador, El Salvador, South Korea, the Congo, Cambodia, Chile, or any of the other much more, real dictatorships that were capitalist or fascist during the 20th century and were explicitly supported by the United States. These countries were, or are, actual self-identified dictatorships, such as the case in Saudi Arabia, or are military dictatorships helped along by American financiers and soldiers. These are in contrast to nations led by a people's revolution or a democratically elected leader that Chris here decides is a dictator, I guess because they have tanks or something? Oh, it's because they're socialists, right. Moving along.
Just like in Stalin's Russia, would-be dictators in these countries set themselves up as all-knowing, all-powerful figures with a unique ability to understand the essence of mystical Marxist teachings to guide and instruct their mere human subjects.
Doubling down on factually wrong bullshit. You know what all these leaders do have in common? Every one of them prioritized a robust education system that emphasizes literacy and includes political and economic philosophy and ideology. Again, the exact opposite of only the leader can interpret Marxist ideology. When you were in school, were you taught about Adam Smith or how stock markets work? Can you regurgitate just how capitalism functions beyond something, something, supply and demand, something, invisible hand, something, something? I know I sure couldn't when I graduated in my very much capitalist country. Instead, billionaires are held aloft as having some special magic that they just know how the money flows because they're geniuses. Look at all the chuds licking the Bitcoin viscera off of Elon Musk's boots. There's your great man ideology, your cult of personality, right there.
In other words, they acted a lot like cult leaders, demanding blind loyalty and violently purging rivals who sought the same position for themselves.
The word purge is something of a buzzword. Do you call it a purge when the Republican Party doubles down on Trumpism and ousts people like Liz Cheney for not supporting him? In the West, we call this politics. In parliamentary systems, we even have an official for each political party called the party whip, whose job it is literally to ensure that people stick to the party ideology. How authoritarian.
And all they really gave people in return was some basic infrastructure.
Sir, have you looked at China recently? Like in the last 40 years? They've eliminated extreme poverty. They've ended the centuries-long string of famines that struck the region since the last little ice age. Do you know why you hear about the Great Leap Forward so much? Other than as anti-communist propaganda, it's because it was the last notable famine in Chinese history. Every single country you mention here, in fact, has flourished enormously since their respective revolutions.
And body pits. Lots of body pits.
100 zillion gorillion dead. Yeah. Hey, question. How many people do you think starve to death under capitalism every year, on average? No reason, just wondering. Because it's 10 million. The answer is 10 million. And that's not counting the hospitals and schools and whatnot bombed in the name of oil-fueled imperialism. Instant body pits, just add nitroamines.
When Mao Zedong took personal control of the Chinese Communist Party.
You mean on the battlefield when the communists were almost entirely wiped out by fascist imperials? Mao didn't seize control from anyone. He was just the highest-ranking officer who survived the Long March.
While the party was holed up in a wartime base in Yan'an in northwest China, Mao forced its members to study his thought, conduct confessions and self-criticism to show their loyalty, and denounce those who failed to fall in line.
Trained and taught soldiers the ideology they were fighting for and introduced the idea of self-criticism, which, again, he engaged in himself. Not sure what Chris's ideal alternative here would be, like not educating revolutionaries on the ideals of the revolution? Hey, let's just make the communist revolution not communist. There's an idea. It's now the just be yourself man revolution. Perfect.
When they emerged from hiding in 1945, the party had turned itself into an organization fully dominated by one core leader.
You mean like any political party? That's what happens, Chris. That's how they work.
When Mao was eventually marginalized by other high-level leaders in his party, he responded by calling on young believers to rise up against them and restore his power.
This might be the only thing that Chris has been even remotely right about thus far. The Cultural Revolution was, arguably, pretty bad. But let's look at what it actually was, shall we? Maybe Mao did just do it to keep himself in power, or maybe he legitimately was concerned about revisionism, that is, capitulation to capitalist elements, within the Communist Party that did eventually win when he died. But regardless, once the Cultural Revolution got moving, it wasn't about him. The big character posters it was famous for that drove the movement were about said revisionism. Mao's first big character poster famously said, "Bombard the headquarters." And ultimately, the very fact that Mao started the Cultural Revolution in earnest by writing a poster against the headquarters of his own party kinda flies in the face of Chris's assertion that Mao was an all-powerful dictator, don't you think?
And since his death in 1976, subsequent leaders have also tried to put themselves in the same position of authority as core of the party, whose thought is absolute truth.
Oh, good thing our political parties don't have leaders and ideologies. They just get together for beers once a week, or something. Deep thoughts while gaming. Bro, these aren't even fucking puddle thoughts.
And these days, you can even be required to download apps like Study She Thought to make the country strong.
Oh no, there are apps that educate people about ideology and theory. Good thing we don't have anything freely circulated on the internet that communicates ideas to their viewers, especially not factually incorrect ideas that rely entirely on blind dogma and hateful emotions. Oh, wait!
For most Marxist regimes, individual freedoms in career and lifestyle choices were also highly restricted. When the state wanted berries, it would mobilize you to go pick berries.
No, they weren't. And aren't, because countries with Marxist ideologies still exist. Cuba has the most libertarian family code in the world, allowing anyone from a gay couple and their adoptive daughter to a couple of friends living in the same building legally identify as a family. And contrary to popular belief, whether you live in Cuba, China, or the former USSR, you had and have full rights to apply to and most likely receive any job you qualify for, just like in the West. In Cuba and the USSR, where unemployment was eliminated, post-secondary education was free, with the expectation that you would be given a job upon graduating. After working at that job for 1 or a few years, depending on the time, nation, and your position, you were completely free to move elsewhere in your field, or even into a different field if you chose. But yes, the state does add incentives into the industries that are necessary. Maybe you've heard the phrase, from each according to their ability to each according to their need. Chris words this in a very dishonest way. The state isn't wanting berries. The government, because there is a difference, is recognizing the need for greater agricultural development, for instance. And so recruiting and paying people in government-supported programs to work in agriculture. In the West, we do the same thing, only it's through businesses. And only we leave it up to people to figure it out for themselves by letting them starve until they find where the jobs are at, making them foot the bill to re-educate and relocate themselves. Maybe there's no work in Newfoundland and poverty rates are high, but hey, guess what? You can come to work in the Albertan oil fields, make that money. At least until those oil fields also stop being profitable and the homelessness rate triples in Alberta too. Oh, I mean, the great Canadian state wants oil, comrade.
But it was Soviet-style Marxists who had turned the use of violence to impose the party's will on the people into an art form.
That's it. No citation, no elaboration, anything. Okay.
You could even run an all-vegan commune where eating meat is banned. Now that's what I call truly demonic.
Okay, I know you're just being silly, but fuck, is this the most American shit I've ever intentionally seen on YouTube? I feel like I'm losing my mind.
Publicly shaming a former boss of the cult? I wonder if anybody else has had that idea.
What? Why are you bringing up China again? I'm not much of a China stan, honest. Like, they popularized self-criticism, and there's a lot there to criticize. But Mao Zedong is still considered a great leader there, even after Deng Xiaoping completely overhauled his system. And Xi Jinping only really built off the basics that Deng laid down, and to my knowledge has never badmouthed him. What the hell are you talking about, Chris? What the hell are you talking about, like, at all, with any of this? Okay, whatever. Phew. We made it. Now, let me get this out there. I don't hate Chris. I don't think he's a terminally shitty human being or anything like that. He's actually got some good anti-capitalist light takes in his videos. This one just was brought to my attention and is particularly problematic. And while socialism and anti-capitalism at large aren't all about history, I hope that he, and maybe you, will consider doing more research before you start, in this case, literally demonizing socialist experiments. Because repeating Western hyper-capitalist propaganda really isn't helpful. We don't need more of that in the world. As for Cult of the Lamb, though, can it, perhaps, under very deep scrutiny and analysis, be interpreted as a representation of communism in some form or facet? No.